Welcome to Evolution Now, Season 2.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Evolution Now. I'm your host, Flora White. I'm delighted to be here with Westchester County District 1 Legislator Colin Smith, where we will be talking about evangelical Christianity, where our country is now 250 years in, as America's birthday is coming up this July 4th, and interracial dynamics in the United States. What does it mean to impose one's moral beliefs on other groups of people who believe differently? Colin, welcome to Evolution Now. Thank you so much for being here today. Colin, you wrote an essay as someone who grew up inside the evangelical church, and you talk about Franklin Graham, son of Pastor Billy Graham, defending AI imagery of President Donald Trump, projecting himself in Christ-like imagery. You reference Matthew 23 in parallel, where Christ calls out to religious leaders, calling them hypocrites. I would love to hear a bit more about that and, what it was like growing up in the evangelical church and what this whole article is talking about.
Sure, and thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. The impetus for the article was what we saw very recently, where the president posted a picture on one of his social media accounts, which I would imagine most, if not every person that saw it, appeared as though he were trying to project an image of him as Jesus Christ, with the long flowing toga, the sash, the imagery of all the white light behind him, as though he were coming down from heaven, and the angelic hosts were accompanying him. And he's placing his hand, or he's moving towards a sick individual on a bed, as though he is healing the person or about to heal the person. If you grew up in the church, particularly like myself, if you grew up in the evangelical and in an evangelical church, that imagery immediately resonates as what I consider to be, from within inside of that tradition at least, as a human being trying to elevate themselves to the status of God. And although I have moved on from many of my former religious beliefs later in life, there's no question about what that image projected. And so when you have a prominent religious leader like Franklin Graham, as you mentioned, son of the late Reverend Billy Graham, who was one of the most, if not the most, famous evangelists and televangelists. Well, he wasn't a televangelist, but the most famous evangelist in at least modern American history. What he says matters, and it lands, and people all across this nation, Christians all across the country, saw Franklin Graham, I'll say, defend Trump, not in that he defended him as, it's okay for Trump to do this. No, he did the old routine of, well, that's not what Trump was actually doing. Franklin Graham essentially said that he didn't think Trump would knowingly portray himself in messianic terms or as Jesus, and that the subsequent backlash was what he called much to do about nothing. And that, for me, speaks to, if in the first instance, I find it to be very hypocritical. Just because Franklin Graham represents a tradition that is built around, Christianity is essentially built around the fundamental belief that God is God, man is not God, and
Right.
to place any person, any human being, to elevate them to the status or the level of God is blasphemy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the violation of the first commandment.
Right. Only
Thou
God is
shalt
holy.
have no false gods before me. And so that was the impetus for the article, Whitewashed Christianity. Because from there I began thinking about how did how did Christianity, how did the public face of Christianity, particularly evangelical Christianity, go from, well, at least at one point, it would be inconceivable that Christian leaders would even try and defend an imagery like this.
And most don't, right? Most don't defend that.
I would hope so. I would say many certainly have not. Many have come out and, or immediately came out and did not condone it. They immediately criticized it. They condemned it.
And the Pope is always making comments to correct a course, to say, this is not being a Christian. This is not moral behavior.
And, I think the Pope certainly has a good deal of credibility. And I say that, of course, tongue in cheek, because the Pope being the highest ranking religious official in the Catholic Church, what the Pope says matters as well. And I don't know what the Pope's specific condemnation of that was, if he made a public comment regarding it. But I would imagine, based on what I've seen and heard publicly of the Pope, that he certainly would not condone that type of imagery. And of course, the president took it down within the day, and then
because he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing, most likely, or at the very least, he realized very quickly that maybe that wasn't such a good move. And so, but either way, he took it down, and then this sort of weird, rambling excuse, supposedly actually represented. But that aside, I think it was very telling, at least from my perspective, to see that there was the fact that there was such a split reaction over the image itself within Christian circles. I think it says a lot about where Christianity, American Christianity at least, has come today. In modern American culture.
Coming up on the 250th year of our country.
Coming up on the 250th year of our country, where there's talk of rededicating the nation to God. Again, underlying that is a tradition, as I understand it, that has held at its core not just this belief. I mean, we're talking a mandate from the Most High God in the earliest traditions of Christianity, of Judaism, of Islam, the earliest traditions, where Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, and number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me.
And now we have the President of the United States depicting himself as Jesus Christ in an AI image.
And being defended by a very prominent evangelical leader.
If you want to get these episodes delivered directly to your inbox, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. When did you first, Colin, feel the gap between what you were taught and what you were seeing and what you were watching? In evangelical summer camps growing up in, was it Red Hook, New Jersey?
Long Beach Island.
Long Beach Island. Oh,
Yeah.
LBI. Okay. Yeah. I love LBI.
I love it too.
So there, and your experiences there growing up, and at what point did that perspective evolve?
It's interesting. There's always been a tension in within me between wanting to believe as a young person growing up in an evangelical church. I attended the First Baptist Church of Peekskill, which is affiliated with an organization, an association formerly called the Conservative Baptist Association. It's more recently, they've changed names, or they've joined with another association, but very, sort of your typical fundamentalist evangelical church, believing in things like the biblical, the doctrine of biblical inspiration, the God is, one person represented or personified in 3 manifestations, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that Christians are to live a pious life, witness to non-believers, to further, standard, typical what you would think of in terms of a traditional evangelical tradition. So
what was that like growing up in the, like 80s, 90s?
70s, 80s.
80s. In Peekskill, a town that you now represent as a legislator, but at the time you were a young man, a boy, learning these lessons. Did you feel like it was pretty standard stuff, or did you notice that some of your friends at school didn't believe this? I mean, how did you fit into the ecosystem, and how did you feel and associate with it growing up?
I mean, I don't know that I was as observant at that age of what others believed. I was certainly in church a lot, and so I was surrounded by a very religious structure.
Okay.
And so in my mind, I suppose I may have on some level assumed that's kind of what everybody believed.
Right.
Maybe.
That's what you do.
I don't know. But I mean, I was aware, obviously, that, there were people from different cultures and, maybe different faiths. I mean, when I was in elementary school, I remember being jealous of my Catholic friends because they got to leave for
CCD?
CCD, right? They got to leave for CCD, and they got to leave school early, like once a week or whatever. And those of us who didn't go to CCD would just watch them walk out the door like, that's not fair. Why did they get to leave?
Right.
But no, I believed very deeply as a child. I was very impressionable, like most kids are. And I remember one time hearing, I guess, a sermon about, it's in the New Testament. I believe it's one of Jesus' sermons, but I'm not 100%. He said, where it says, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, that you can tell that mountain to go jump into the ocean, and it will. As a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, right, I thought, wow, do I have faith the size of a mustard seed? I didn't really know what a mustard seed was, but I imagine it wasn't that big. Mm-hmm. And I can remember standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, looking out across the Hudson River to what I didn't know at the time, but it was actually Mount Dunderberg. It's across the Peekskill Bay. And it's Stony Point, and just thinking, and I think I may have even said it out loud, jump into the river. And of course, Mount Dunderberg did not jump or fall or in any way, shape, or form move. And it left me with the question, do I even have faith the size of a mustard seed? Not that, is this really work, but am I faithful enough? Do I believe enough? So that was the tradition I was raised in, and it was what I believed. It was what I honestly believed, but I guess I was always looking for evidence of those beliefs, and how real are they,
So you had that analytical attorney's mind. For those who are just tuning in here, Colin's an attorney and a legislator in Westchester County of District 1, and so you've had that analytical mind. You question things even back at the age of 7 or 8.
Yeah, I questioned things at the age of 7 or 8. I remember in middle school, I was attending. My parents put me in a Christian academy for 7th and 8th grade, and where they were teaching, creation science, and I was learning that in school, but outside of the Christian educational context. Of course, I was exposed to, evolutionary science, and I loved going to museums and aquariums. And I can remember thinking in, 12 or 13 years old, like, not that I had the ability to say, well, evolution makes more sense than creation, or, not an intellectual differentiation in that sense. I just remember thinking, like, evolution is such a cooler way of looking at life. It has, the ring of truth to it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have articulated it like that back then. Mm-hmm. I just remember thinking at that point, I guess I was starting to, maybe really internally start to question, for lack of a better word, question my fidelity to these beliefs that I was raised in. So there's these different points along the way that I remember having these particular, bouts of, confusion, wonder.
Colin, you use in your article, whitewash Christianity. You use the word betrayal, not hypocrisy, not inconsistency. Betrayal implies a relationship, a covenant broken. Who betrayed whom exactly?
I can answer that question, or I should say the answer to that question really takes place on two levels. So there is my critique of the whitewashing of the church, of Christianity here in America as a betrayal of what they've espoused within their own worldview, within their own belief system, to what they profess to believe, to be witness to, things like honesty, truth, having mercy and compassion for one's enemies, things that when I was when I was growing up it was instilled in me that these were qualities of a good Christian. There's a very beautiful passage in maybe the book of Romans or the Acts in the New Testament. It could be in the Corinthians, I don't recall offhand, but where the Apostle Paul talks about the fruits of the Spirit. Now, we've all heard that phrase, right?
Yep.
And to my recollection, there's 9. Love, joy, peace, kindness, patience, goodness, faith, humbleness, temperance. I may have mixed those up. But in any event, these are qualities that, as I understood them, were the ultimate test, the sort of litmus test of what makes somebody a Christian. That's how I understood it. And what we've seen, at least again, my view, the church endorse or align themselves with. And let me just clarify. When I say the church, I'm referring to a specific strand within, sort of the church could refer to, many different denominations and settings. I'm referring to that strand of in Christendom of American evangelicalism that has from that in modern times has made it an intentional decision to engage politically for the purpose of realizing religious or sacred dominance in the realm of government, of politics. And in order to, again, in my view, to accomplish that, I feel like they have betrayed what their own teachings say they should aspire to be, that the followers of this tradition should aspire to be. And, in the article and in the, in some of my other writings around this topic, I talk about how we're at a point now where, political domination, gets wrapped in terms of fidelity, right? Of fidelity to one's faith, fidelity to God's moral order, and that has been used to, in my opinion, to cover over cruelty, right? To justify imposing burdens on others who don't fit the mold, who don't fit who aren't on the inside socially.
You talk about this in your book, which I know it's coming out maybe later this year or next year. But do you want to talk about how this ties into a larger body of work, Colin, that you in research that you've done on this topic? Because I think this is a really important point you're making.
Sure. So I've been working over the last year on a project. I'll call it for lack of a better word, because until it's actually finished, the title is a work in progress. And how the final outlay of the chapters is still up in the air, but the spine of the work is what started out as what I call manufactured reality, manufactured truth. I argue that there are 4 basic components that comprise this manufactured truth, manufactured reality. We start with certainty, right? How do we become certain of anything, right? How are you certain in your belief structure? How are you certain in what you what you profess to know and believe, and how you operate? The assumptions upon which we operate.
And some of that is the fidelity you talked about.
In daily life, yes.
Right.
And based off of that certainty, right? We think of when we're certain about things. We think about what is true versus what is not true. We assume oftentimes what the veracity of those things, right? We assume that the sun is the center of the solar system, right? But at one time we assumed that the Earth was the center of the solar
sun
system.
shines on everyone the same way, but it doesn't.
But it doesn't. That's a great way to look at it, because those going in and what goes into those assumptions, what makes us believe those things to be true, and one of the areas that we see certainty being most prominent and most consequential is in the area of morality, right? And I talk in my book about the famous Stuart Potter case, where Justice Stuart Potter says, I can't describe for you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it.
I know it when I see it.
And that is what I call morality arriving as a verdict, right? We already make a judgment about something based upon what we feel is, the obvious nature of it. But in reality, in my opinion, there's nothing. The obviousness is not a substitute for certainty. Obviousness is the end result of a process. Of a process that starts when we are, yay high, of being exposed to other people's certainties, other people's beliefs, experiences, our church, our schools, our neighborhoods, all of those
systems we grow up in.
The systems that we grow up in, all of those things are what teach us, what form the idea of certainty within us. And so at some point, it's no longer something we have to prove within our day-to-day lives. It's like the atmosphere. It's like weather. It's the environment within which we live. So that is in what I call morality arriving as a verdict. We already recognize it for what we believe it to be. From that, we move on to the manufacture of belonging, and that has a lot to do with once we have established a moral order, now we can turn that outward and begin to decide who fits and who doesn't. And that's what I call moral sorting, right? Who is included, who isn't, who is living the right way and who isn't. And then once that has cemented itself, as we see, and this isn't just something that happens within religious orders. This happens within cultures, within political systems,
in the world,
within every type of community that exists. But once that hardens, the final piece is what I call sanctification, and that's where those judgments, now hardened, become the basis for not just making a judgment on others, but burdening the others with the consequences of that judgment.
And I love this concept that you talk about, burdening others. Can you tell us exactly what you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is when we have established, well, let's take for example, criminal law, the penal law, right? The New York State has a penal code, right? And under that penal code are all of the crimes, the offenses for which if you violate, you can be arrested and prosecuted for. That's a burden, right? That is a burden that we as a society have agreed can be justifiably and rightly placed on any member of society who breaks that, who violates that. So if you commit a burglary, you can go to jail. If you commit an assault, you can be arrested and be prosecuted. And there's justification for that burden, right? Because we don't want people running around being able to commit these, what we call crimes, against others without any sort of accountability or punishment.
It applies to everyone.
It applies to everyone. There's different types of burdens, though, right? And the type of burdening that I have a problem with is when we place burdens on people for reasons that are not publicly justifiable, that are not publicly defensible, and in many cases aren't even publicly, or maybe a better word would be civically articulable.
They're not part of our social contract, our social agreement.
Exactly. They exist within the community that is espousing them, right?
The community in power.
The community. Well, it could be it usually aligns with the community in power, but a lot of times those communities are trying to get power, and so they place a burden on those who don't comply. Who don't fit that role. And I think we see that in, for example, when we talk about go back to the criminal law example, the penal law example. There were many states, probably all of them at one point, that have, what they call sodomy laws, right? And what we've come to understand those to be over time is those were really aimed at gay and lesbians, right? Anti-sodomy, those statutes basically saying that if you engage in this type of behavior, you can be criminally prosecuted for.
Which, first of all, how is anyone going to know? But that's a different conversation.
Well, that's a different
for
conversation.
Different show.
But
yeah.
Let's say, for whatever reason, the authorities find out.
What are we in the 1600s?
Well, I mean...
it's crazy.
Or the 1960s.
Yes.
The famous case of Loving versus Virginia. Right?
The couple, interracial couple.
Interracial couple. They couldn't legally marry in Virginia, so they had to go across state lines, get married in D.C., I believe it was, or Maryland. But then when they came back to Virginia, they were arrested. And that now that's a legal burden, but it's also a burden that was smuggled into the law, because what it really was an example of the enforcement of a racial hierarchy that had existed in this country, for centuries prior. And so that is an example of sanctification of meaning, sanctification of morality, sanctification of whose heritage is viewed as entitled and legitimate, and whose isn't. And when that gets, whether it's, through law or, other means, right? Because law certainly isn't the only way in which a community's moral code or definition of belonging can be enforced. Then now you're placing a burden on another individual to bear the cost of that belief. Either one, if they don't conform, or two, maybe they can't conform by virtue of their ethnic or cultural background, or their sexuality or gender identity.
So, Colin, where do we go from there in your book? I'm calling it a book. I'm claiming it as a book.
It is a book. It's still in progress.
It's still in progress.
Yes.
In your research, where do you go from there? Can you tell us how you conclude, or what your sort of call to action is? Is there a call to action in your body of work?
Yes. And I'll start by saying that I am probably by nature a pessimist as opposed to being an optimist.
And I want to talk about, we can just drink freely here. And I want to talk about why that is, because, the lens we look at the world through is usually based on experiences we've had. And I do want to talk about your college experiences and the path of empowerment that really in some ways, perhaps led you to where you are now. But by nature, you're saying you're a pessimist.
I think I'm a bit more of a pessimist than an optimist, at least when it comes to, how I see things working out in the future, with respect to fostering a society where people can have, their own faith and believe their own truth as far as, when we talk about whether it's religion or spirituality or ethnicity, culture, private belief is not the problem, right? It's when those who hold those beliefs attempt to make others accountable under them, right? Burden others. That is the point at which, that burden, that effort to to bind somebody else under your beliefs, to obtain jurisdiction over another individual, that is the point at which those beliefs, that certainty, has to be publicly answerable, publicly defensible, in a way that is legible to everyone, not just people who are inside your tradition, not just people who are inside your belief structure, right? Like when, if you're a member of a church, for example, right? There's a whole vocabulary, there's a whole vernacular, there's a whole community of meaning that is absolutely 100% significant within the context of that community, right? When you talk about, you say words like hallelujah, right?
Right.
When you say, when you talk about, being reborn in the spirit, right? Just a couple of phrases that come to mind. Those are meaningful terms within that context. But outside of the community of faith, outside of those four walls, outside of those rooms, they don't carry the same weight. They're not as intelligible to somebody who doesn't share that belief, who doesn't share that worldview. And that's what I mean by legibility, right? Something has to, in order for something to be legible, to be publicly legible, it has to be based upon a commonality of understanding, on a common ground of, there has to be a common ground of understanding of what the terms are that we're using to define this attempt, right? Or to define these reasons as to why your beliefs should bind me, why you should be able to have jurisdiction over me, why I should be burdened by that belief. And I think that is fundamental. That is, we have to start from a common understanding of the terms that we're using, of a common understanding of what it means to be human beings, equals, right? Not one is subject to another, in a society where we all have, equal say, right? Equal access to recourse, and we can speak intelligibly to one another. We can speak in terms that everybody is understand. No sacred meanings, no insider meanings. In other words, we can't use our own internal faith, private beliefs as a basis to force those beliefs on others. That's the history of the world in large part. But it doesn't have to be that way. And one of the beautiful things about, in my opinion, about the United States, about the American experiment, is that we have an infrastructure in place to do just that. And by that I mean our Constitution, right, and our legal structure, which, however imperfect it is, has historically, as I understand it, been probably more responsible for more the advancement of human rights more than any other vehicle or any other society, any other process in history.
And so do you turn, Colin, to our legal system to help evolve our narrative as a country? Do you suggest that the laws that we live under and continuing to re-examine them and evolve them is the answer to bringing our society forward and into the future rather than continuing to revert to these old systems that are imbalanced.
I mean, I think that is the apparatus that historically has been what does that. But it doesn't do that in a vacuum, right? It certainly, usually the law is sort of the finalization of a much longer process, right? I'll use two examples of, these landmark decisions in United States jurisprudence in the 20th century. I see it as the way that it has been done. Maybe that's a way of putting it, but not in a vacuum, right? Plessy versus Ferguson, you're familiar with the case, separate but equal. It's viewed as the Supreme Court's endorsement of Jim Crow, right, of segregation in the early 1900s, with one dissenting voice, Justice Harlan, who basically said, nope, separate is true, equal is not true. There's nothing equal about the social, political, economic, legal situations of white Americans and black Americans, and anybody who lives here can see that. It was essentially overturned by Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, I believe, which turned separate but equal on it, said that's not the case. Yes, this country is separate, but it's certainly not equal, but it now has to become equal. And it was about, equal school educational facilities. Why was Plessy, earlier allowed to, why did that decision occur when it did? And, Brown versus Board occur when it did? Mm-hmm. Well, the reason is because the country wasn't ready for Brown versus Board in 1920.
It's a reflection of our society.
It's absolutely a reflection of our society. So, but it was necessary in order to combat segregation, to combat the inequality that existed between black and white America. And so the law works, to cement the rights, to protect the rights, or at least, when it's working well, in my opinion, of those who, theretofore did not have that protection.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like the law is like the last stop after society's already said, this is where we are, then the law sort of cements that step to say, we're going to formalize this.
I think that when enough people are, when enough has happened to move in that direction from a social and a political standpoint, then yes, mm-hmm. That's typically where you see the law stepping in. But, it's never a single factor, mm-hmm. because many people credit the 1858 decision of Dred Scott, mm-hmm. As being, essentially what, laid what was sort of the flashpoint for the Civil War, right? Because the Supreme Court said that we could send, that a state can say that you're not, a citizen based upon your skin color, whatever, and they sent him back to his owners in Missouri or whatever it was. And the people who believed that, slavery should be abolished said, no, we're not going to tolerate that. So, that's a very watered down paraphrase.
And I mean, how different is that than what we're seeing now with ICE?
Well, I think what we're seeing now with ICE, and I will say that ICE is just the apparatus that the federal government uses to enforce its policies. But when you say ICE, you encompass what we're talking about here. So it's a good starting point. But when we're talking about the inherent worth of persons versus, legal status, again, I think we see the people who are supporters of tough immigration policy, of deporting so-called illegals, essentially saying we don't want to share our country, our political system, our economic system with those who are here illegally. And I'm not saying that immigration laws are of no value. Every country has them.
There needs to be some infrastructure in place.
There needs
just
to
like
be
any other
infrastructure.
law.
There needs to be enforcement. There needs to be a mechanism of determining who should be here, who shouldn't. But I think what we've seen in the larger or the wider public argument is less about that and more about who belongs here. And so I think
That's that sorting that you were talking about.
in my opinion, yes, that the hierarchy of persons gets smuggled into the phrasing of, well, we're just enforcing the law, because what we see is the focus oftentimes is on not just immigrants or people who are here without status as a whole, and people from specific areas, from specific countries, from specific cultures, who speak a specific language. Those persons are the face of the immigrants against whom this so-called I would say so-called, but what I would call the war on immigration.
You're talking about people of Middle Eastern descent, people of Arab or Muslim descent.
I think they could be included in that, but I think much of what we see in the news and in the media, people who are from Central and South America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, that's not to in any way say that we shouldn't have an immigration structure, a rigorous immigration policy in place. But it's telling when the focus of that policy, or I should say it's telling where the focus of that policy is in terms of what is underlying the current, in this case, the current administration's enforcement efforts. And it isn't just the current administration. I mean, we're talking about that's built out of the wider public sentiment surrounding the issue. And it's complex. It's
complex. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this, and we may edit it out, but like post 9/11 is when a lot of that started.
Yeah, I think we saw, yes, absolutely.
If you want to get these episodes delivered directly to your inbox, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.
What would you say to someone who's watching this whole conversation and says, so what? What does this mean to where we are as a country now and our 250th birthday?
So I think that what does it mean to where we are as a country? I think we, in a lot of ways, are on the verge of what I would caution is I don't want to over-dramatize the situation.
Okay, worst case scenario.
But when we talk about the 250th anniversary and we hear leaders, national leaders, political and religious leaders, talking about the rededication of this country to God, I'm not 100% sure what that means, because from a historical standpoint, when you look at the fact that the First Amendment of the United States Constitution contains within it the Establishment Clause, right? That there shall be no religion established, right? That or no established religion, however you want to say it. That the idea of dedicating or rededicating a country to God, I think, is inherently contradictory to the First Amendment, to the founders or to the architects, the framers of the Constitution, which that no, we're not going to dedicate. We never dedicated the country to God, and so there's no rededication of it.
Right.
Now, does that mean that the religious environment that existed in 1776 and 1787 is what we have, is like what it is today? Well, no, it wasn't nearly as pluralistic, right? Because by and large, it was Christians who were people who were in power. And I think that, to me, is an even, that fact is a sort of a stronger argument for my point, which is that although many of the signers of the Declaration, the framers of the Constitution, much more Christian as a whole than we see, in today's government, they still saw fit to, put into the founding document of this country that we have to keep church and state separate. And so the idea of rededicating the country to God is, in my opinion, it's a
false premise.
It's a false premise, exactly. It's a fabricated vision or version of the real story of the United States. Is there real history to it? Well, of course there is, because religion has been part of Christianity in particular has been a part of this country from the very beginning, and not all of that history is good. In fact, much of it is not.
Right.
There's context around it. So the impulse, I think, is understandable, but it's based upon a narrative that does not align with the facts, number one, but number two, and more importantly, does not align with what the basis of the founding of our country is all about, because it's not about dedicating. This country was not dedicated to God, despite the fact that I'm sure they, opened, meetings with prayers.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Well, the Pledge of Allegiance, which
I'm not
did not include one nation under God until I think it was under Eisenhower that addition was put in there. But just the point being,
was that like an anti-communist?
I wouldn't be able to.
Curious.
I wouldn't. I just know that it wasn't always.
It wasn't always in there. Interesting.
So my thoughts are this: the idea of rededicating the nation to God. If that's how you want to, memorialize or celebrate the country's 250th anniversary in a private setting, right? I mean, even if you want to, buy out a stadium and invite all of your, religious friends to come, if, Joel Osteen or somebody wants it, that's fine. But it should not be something that the United States government pushes as a narrative of, number one, as a narrative that we are rededicating this to God, because we were never, in my opinion, dedicated it to God in the first place. But it's inappropriate as well, I think, for the government to...
Is it that idea of imposing again, of putting those morals on a group of people?
I think that's exactly what it is, right? You're imposing this sacred belief that, God is not just God, but, the Christian God is stands at the top of the moral hierarchy, and that the United States, as a country of immigrants and of diverse beliefs,
right,
and traditions and ways of life, is somehow subject to that God. Well, that to me is, number one, it's a violation of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause. Number two, and perhaps more fundamentally, it gives the appearance of authority, and maybe actual authority, to a certain group, a certain religious group, or a certain sacred group that holds a certain sacred belief. It gives them claim over the public domain of belief, and whose beliefs are legitimate, whose are not, who should be burdened by this belief. And from that perspective, I don't think that it's not something that I will not be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States as a rededication to God. I will be celebrating it.
Colin, how will you be celebrating and commemorating the 250th anniversary of the United States?
So I'll probably be going to a lot of barbecues, a lot of cookouts, eating a lot of hot dogs.
Nice.
Hopefully find a place with good fireworks. But no, I think that commemorating the 250th anniversary of our country is very important, and is something that we should all should, maybe is a strong word, but I think it's something that we can all participate in a way that, we feel comfortable doing, because, we've come a long way. I'm critical of the country. I'm critical of the American evangelical tradition's involvement in that history. But I'm also very, I'm
You're
proud.
a legislator.
I'm a legislator. I'm proud to be an American, and I think that we've come a long way politically, socially, legislatively from where we started, and we can continue. Hopefully, we'll continue that forward trajectory. So there's a lot to celebrate. The rededication to God part is just not something that I feel is appropriate or even necessary or relevant.
Don't bring that to the barbecue.
Don't bring that to the barbecue, or at least don't bring it to my barbecue. Bring it to someone else's.
Now, before we wrap up today, because I know we've talked a long time, we need that story from college back in the early 90s in Ohio.
Yes.
Can we go back there for a minute?
Absolutely. There's
Please.
plenty of stories, but I think I know the one you're
You know the one
referring
we spoke about. So you were in Ohio at the university. It's
Cedarville College, which is now Cedarville University.
Cedarville College, now Cedarville University, in like 93 or give or take.
1993, that's when I started, yeah.
And you arrived on campus, and what is one of the first images that you noticed?
So my family and I had we drove out to Cedarville from New York. Cedarville is in southwestern Ohio. It's about a 12-and-a-half-hour straight drive. But,
Back when people drove, we would drive 12 hours all the time.
We drove in my, because our car wouldn't make it, our family car. So my aunt loaned us her car. It's like a 1980-something Buick Century.
Nice.
Which was also on its last leg. But
you made the trip.
Made the trip. 5 of us. My aunt came with us. We get there. And I think the trip went from what should have been a 12-hour trip to closer to like 18 hours. But we get there. We pull into campus. I'm excited. I'm tired. But I'm excited. And I notice as we're driving in that one of the in passing by one of the dorms, that there was a Confederate flag in one of the windows. And I don't even know if I made a comment about it, but I certainly took note of it. And
did your family did they comment? Was it just like,
I don't even recall if any of them noticed it, but I do recall a conversation I had with my mother prior to going to Ohio, which was essentially along these lines. She said, it's going to be different out there than what you're used to here. And of course I was 19. I was, yeah, I know, Mom, I'll be fine.
And your mom is white and your dad is black.
Right. And so, they have had their own lived experience of, where race and religion and politics and culture intersect when they were married in the early 1970s.
And I know a little bit about your parents, and I say that because we did a film together about the Tuskegee Airmen and your grandfather, who was a Tuskegee Airman.
That's right. And
Yeah.
And so coming from that, that background, that experience, that lived history, my mother, who's a very perceptive woman, had made a comment just at some point prior to me going to Ohio that, honey, it's going to be a little different out there than what you're used to. Something along those lines. Of course, I didn't really know what she was talking about at the time, but I come to understand what she probably meant. The area that you're going to is probably not as, diverse, receptive, certainly not as integrated as where you're coming from. And so...
Had you experienced much racism or discrimination in New York in Peekskill as a kid?
I think when you grow up in any culture, but certainly in a culture like ours that's very diverse, very racially diverse, you're going to experience it
But
from
maybe don't recognize it.
one side or the other. Yeah.
Right.
And being a product of an interracial marriage, people didn't always know how to place me, right? Because we're always looking to place people, right? Where's that person from? They sound like they're from here.
Their last name sounds different.
Their last name sounds different. I grew up in a mostly, or I should say predominantly African-American neighborhood. So most of my friends were African American. Not all, right? And I don't think I would have interpreted, much of what I experienced back then as, overt racism or discrimination. Looking back on it, of course, I can think, there's certainly certain times where I'm like, oh yeah, that probably was like acting this way because of who I am. And that happened to largely take place within the context of my family, my mother's side of the family. They weren't all as accepting of my dad and her being together, of me as the product of that, my brother and I. But, it was...
Doug.
Doug, yes, my brother Doug. So, but, moving forward to the experience I had at college, at Christian college, the Confederate flag was it was a harbinger. I didn't recognize it at the time. I wasn't thinking about it. But certainly I began to, it set the tone, right? Because it appeared as background. It didn't appear as protest, as, an overt, you don't belong here. Like, nobody came out and said that to me.
It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the weather.
It was like the weather. It was the atmosphere. And then, fast forward maybe a year and a half, there was an incident where, let me just say, there were probably of a campus college, a student body of about 3,000. I'm guessing there were probably less than 50 students of color, or 50 African American students on campus. So we were a minority, in every sense of the word, but certainly from a percentage-wise, a number standpoint. And so, and I interacted with everybody, right? And I've always been that way.
And you led the philosophy club.
I was in the philosophy club. I led the intercultural club. We couldn't call it the multicultural club. I was involved.
Explain why you couldn't call it the multicultural club.
As it was explained to me, the term multicultural, especially when we're talking about the early 1990s, this concept of multiculturalism, it was viewed with suspicion because the idea of multiculturalism really stood in opposition to sort of these long-standing traditions and belief structures in evangelicalism and in conservative fundamentalism of essentially a racial hierarchy in which was dominated, of course, by white Americans, but also multiculturalism, sort of signified or represented the idea that it was okay to be of a different religious belief than Christianity, and further suggested that it was okay to have a different view or belief when it came to sexuality, when it came to gender identity. Although gender identity as a term, as a phrase, was not
new. Yeah, it wasn't even out
there. It didn't
there.
really exist back then, but it certainly did exist in terms of people.
Social dynamics.
So multiculturalism left a bad taste in the mouth of conservatives. And so for those reasons, I was told that the club was named intercultural because that was a much more palatable and watered down, phrasing of it. And, you choose your battles. At least that's how I viewed it.
And this is an example of going deep on what seemingly is just a naming convention, but there is so much more to it.
Oh, so much more.
And so this just scratches the surface. That's just one example.
That's right. Absolutely. And, the women's club, I'm sure that initially the women who, began that would have preferred a term more like the feminist club, right? But certainly that would not have been approved or allowed by the administration. These naming conventions, like you talk about, play a lot into what ultimately what we confronted when a white student had used a very derogatory term in reference to a student of color.
And this was a student who was friends with a white female student,
Because he was
right?
friends with a
They
white
were
female
friends,
student.
They had a relationship of platonic, who knows?
Yeah,
Whatever.
It could have been more, but they were
Doesn't matter.
certainly enjoyed a very close, friendly relationship.
They had a relationship in
public.
some way. They walked around campus together.
They walked around campus together. They ate lunch together. I ate lunch with them on many an occasion. Both very very lovely people.
And the girl was blonde.
She was this blonde-haired, long, flowing locks. She was from like Iowa.
So visually, two very different people.
Visually, you
On
would
the
you have
outside.
seen what a contrast, right? Because my friend, he was he's from New York, right? He was very he had a very what we would probably call an urban style of dress.
Okay.
He was very dark skinned. Now it just so happened that the slur used is by this other individual was a slur that typically reserved for in reference to African American. My friend, on the other hand, happens to be Dominican.
What was his name?
His name was Saulo,
Saulo.
and
And what did they call him? Who said it? What happened?
Well, I can't remember the guy's name.
Yeah.
But he essentially called my friend a coon, and that's a derogatory term used to refer to blacks. It's an old term, and we ultimately confronted him, the guy that said it, about it.
So you got together
And I'll tell you the
with
story.
a group.
Yeah. So he said that not to my friend. He said that to the girl, something along the lines of, why are you hanging out with this coon? She was very upset by that. She went back to my friend, told him. My friend wasn't sure what to do about that. So we got together. When I say we, I mean several of us students of color, African American students, got together and we're trying to figure out how do we respond to this, because we knew that we had to respond. And when I say we had to respond, I mean we felt that this needed to be addressed, and we decided we would confront this individual. We knew who he was. We knew he was part of the only fraternity on campus, and that at that very time, that fraternity was having their weekly or month, whatever, Bible study with their fraternity chaplain, who was the head of the Bible department at the time. And we marched into that Bible study, and we called this guy out of the room, and my friend basically confronted him in the hallway.
And what was his reaction when he was confronted?
He was, I think he was in disbelief that he was actually being confronted. And then he was probably scared because, there was like 10 of us standing there in the hallway. And I'm sure we looked probably, not like we were there to, make nice. But
you asked each other, right? Didn't someone say?
We debated whether we should respond with force or without the use of force.
Should we kick his ass or not?
Yes, and I prevailed in the let's not kick his ass. Let's just talk to him. And we did. And he apologized. That was sort of the end of it. But then we did pursue the issue.
Wait, when
sorry.
he was at the door and you called him out, how many people were in the room with him? Did anyone come out with your group of?
Probably 20 people in the room with him, 20 of his fraternity brothers and the head of the Bible department. And I think one of them attempted to come out and was immediately intercepted by one or two of us who told him, this has nothing to do with you, go back inside, which he did. But nobody else came out, and I think they were all, probably most of them didn't know what it was about. But it was certainly the visual of, these, black students basically walking into their Bible study and saying, we got to talk to this dude in the hallway now. And that's what we did. And I don't know what effect that had on this guy, as a person, because I was never really friends with him to begin with, and I didn't know him that well. But we did ultimately go from there to addressing the issue with the administration, with the dean, of students at the time. And basically, the argument went like this. You have a student handbook that proscribes things like going to movies. You can get demerits for listening to the wrong music, for entering the dorm of the opposite sex without permission, for cursing, right? The traditional curse words, for smoking, for drinking, all of these things. Some of them you can even be expelled from a school. But if someone comes down the hallway or is walking across the quad and yells out the N-word to me, yeah, it's going to jar some people. It's going to cause some people to say, hey, don't say that. But there's nothing officially proscribing that. Why not? Because of all of these things, that one word is so charged and is so vile and is so hurtful and so demeaning. If you claim to be a Christian community looking out for your Christian brothers and sisters, this is something that should be addressed. And I just don't think it's ever been brought to the attention of the administration prior to that, quite in those terms. And the president of the college addressed the student body about it, within that, sometime shortly thereafter, and basically said, just like it's wrong to curse and drink and smoke, it's wrong to refer to your black brothers and sisters in these terms. And I respected that. What policy ramifications that had or what impact that had on people, it's hard to know. But we addressed it, and they in turn addressed it. So, but it was the fact that we had to address it in the early 1990s, which is telling about sort of what the climate and the atmosphere was at that point.
That's 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Right.
It's not that long ago, and I said, I think I had even made reference at one point to the fact that there was a Confederate flag hanging in somebody's window. You guys walk by it every day like it's nothing. But let me educate you as to, if you're not aware, let me educate you as to why that means something, and it means why it's particularly hurtful to some of your students.
And Colin, I mean, that's a beautifully told story, and it stayed with me the first time I heard it, and it's even more powerful this time for so many reasons. The fact that you spoke truth to power, you went in as a group, nobody stood up and defended this other student who said this word. There was no solidarity on his side.
No.
And that was an example of how you impacted the system in a positive way, where maybe culture was caught up and ready for the president of the school to say something, and it hadn't been said, and you pushed that forward. Do you think that that was a seminal moment for you to pursue a legal career, maybe not directly in that very moment, but do you think that set you on a path to seeking out more justice through law?
Well, I mean, I think that that certainly was, one step along the path. And ultimately, I've, come to where I am today. But that was where I got my my foray into activism on a Christian college campus in the middle of Ohio.
Colin, thank you for being on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to continuing as you evolve your story and this story, and as you continue to evolve our story here in Westchester as Legislator and through all of the work and research that you do.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show, and I had a great time talking. I hope the conversation was equally enjoyable and engaging, and we'll continue. I look forward to continuing to share my path.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining. Don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you can catch more episodes like this on Evolution Now.
If you want to get these episodes delivered directly to your inbox, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.